Okay, so we're going to continue on the same thread of indigenous futurism. We are thrilled to welcome Sky Hopinka, who has presented two fantastic exhibitions this year with us. The Sun Comes In Whenever It Wants, which just finished at Luma Hall, and Behind the Evening Tide, which is now on view at Luma Westbow, and until the end of January. So Sky Hopinka belongs to the Ho-Chunk Nation and the Pechanga band of Luiseño Indians. His cinematographic, photographic, and textual practice centers around personal positions of indigenous homeland and landscape. Through interviews, poem, songs, image, Hopinka unfolds a contemporary indigenous life. Dreams, myth, vision of the past and future have a specific part in your work, and this is what we would like to explore through this contribution. So Sky Hopinka, we're very happy to have you here today, and we give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. It's so good to be here and to be sharing the stage with so many amazing thinkers and artists and writers and scholars. And it's really good to see Grace. I made my first film in Grace's Indigenous Cinema class in 2010. I can't remember what the prompt was, but I think it was something like, for the final project, you could write a paper or make a film, and I chose to make a film. I chose to make a documentary about my friends and I building a fishing scaffold on the Columbia River. And one of the key points behind that we really wanted to do with that film, or I was thinking through, is how to portray Native peoples existing in a contemporary setting without historicizing ourselves, without trying to explain who we are, where we come from, why we're doing what we're doing for an audience that is not our own. And it wasn't a very good film, but I learned how to edit, and I learned how to do a lot of things with the camera that began a path that I'm on now, which is about indigenous presence and indigenous presence. Not presence as in gifts, maybe they're gifts, but presence as in the now. And the title of this is You Are the Dreamer and the Dream. And I'll be honest, when I came up with that title, I didn't come up with it, but when Flora asked me for a title, I chose it because I wasn't quite sure what I would talk about. It's actually a line from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, from the episode Far Beyond the Stars. And it's one of my favorite episodes. It's a really, really beautiful episode that touches on a lot of the complexities with Black experience in the US and just the collapse of the presence, or that presence, the Star Trek presence in the past, and this idea that you are both simultaneously the dreamer and the dream. And what does that mean for indigenous experience or indigenous presence as it relates to historicity, as it relates to how we have existed in the past or how we're understood? This idea of myth has been talked about today, and how we exist in myth or not myth, or how we're understood in a present sort of sense. And it was interesting to think about that point from the conversation earlier about how essentially Native peoples are mythologized. We're already myths. We're already part of a national mythology of the United States, an identity of who we once were, and that's how we exist. And the complication around that is how we exist now is also a myth. We're not seen as real, or we're not recognized as such. And so it's just like there's those tensions that are at play that I think are really fascinating, and that I try to explore in the work that I make. And I'm going to show some clips and then stop and talk about them, and then show some clips and stop and talk. And I'm going to stop and talk a little bit more about this next clip coming up from a film called Fainting Spells. Now, this is the first film that I made where I was really thinking about trying to create a myth, or how I, as a Native person living in 2017, 19, whenever the film was made, can reclaim myths, to reclaim our mythologies as Ho-Chunk people, where as myths were told in 1905 to Paul Radin and anthropologists studying our people, they were written down, they were published in a book, and in some sort of way they were cast in amber, they were solidified into a concrete idea of this is the authentic story. Even though for ages and eons, the stories change and adapt and evolve over time based on who's telling the story, based on who's sitting in the audience, based on the time of year. But once this story was written down 100 years ago, that became the true version, the authentic version. And so being 100 years removed from that story, like how can I re-engage with that past, with that process of creating myths, of telling stories that function not only to teach about who we are and how we exist, but also what we can imagine and how we understand ourselves in the world. So this first clip is from Fainting Spells, and it's the first few minutes, and in essence, I'm making up a myth, or I'm creating a myth, I don't know what the difference is, about this plant that my tribe used to revive people that have fainted. And I'll let it play, so go ahead and play it, please. So that's the first section of the film. It's broken up into 3 different parts. The main textual device is the text that scrolls through the center of the screen. And in a number of my films, I tend to place text in the center of the screen for different effect and different variations, but mainly the way it is for me to, like, I guess, position myself as the filmmaker, and also to center text as part of the image, not necessarily sub to anything, not like a subtitle, but just a title, a way to have the text as a boundary or as some way to interfere with one's viewing of the image or understanding the image. And that relates to legibility as well. Like, what can you read? What do you know in terms of the things that I'm referencing that might be specific to Ho-Chunk peoples or Pechanga peoples or Native peoples broadly in the United States? And it's through that specificity that I'm also hoping to open up the interpretation of it into something that is larger, beyond something that's entirely Ho-Chunk. Because I'm not going to make a film explaining the ins and outs of our myths, because that's been done before. I mean, ask Paul Radin. I mean, you can't, because he's dead, but still you have his books, and you have these different ways of engaging with his research and his scholarly pursuits to understand us. And I'm also interested in moving in those same, I don't know, those realms in terms of the ways that they can intersect. As you'll see in this next clip, it's from this film called I'll Remember You As You Were, Not As What You'll Become. It's an engagement with text that Paul Radin wrote with Jasper Blosnick, again, some 100 years ago, about our beliefs in reincarnation. And it's my interest in reincarnation, specifically my tribe's relationship to reincarnation and how we practiced it, that was really a driving force behind the making of this film, and also my understanding of who we are and how to relate to the past. And I guess, like, to tie it into the idea of dreams as well, or just the title of this talk, You Are the Dreamer in the Dream. I mean, what does it mean to also be the embodiment of the dreams of my ancestor? Am I living up to what they dreamt? Am I living in a world that they could never have dreamt up themselves? What does that mean for myself and also for the future, as I am potentially a future ancestor? And so, like, I mean, those are the things that kind of swirl around these works. And I guess you can go ahead and play this next clip from I'll Remember You As You Were, Not As What You'll Become. Actually, hold on.
And then becoming quiet, went up the road, up the stream, off the path, near the clearing by the river.
That's my voice.
We burned the kindling
Could you please
and
pause?
talked and told stories about water.
All right, thank
the
you.
Waves.
Hold on.
With swells calling to us on nights like this. And stars would flicker and fade as eyelids lift slowly, under lashes way down.
This is another myth that I made up.
Drawn in the morning fog, in the misty fog, yet to burn away.
This is from a film called Lore, which is another stab at myth. I'll talk about it afterwards.
This is Eros and Caprice, spanning and describing valleys cut deep by rivers, pushing down on the rise of earth. Their games were played, and now what we have is a land and a space, open and full of vacant stories, slack-jawed and staring, waiting for what will come next. While waiting, they sing a song heard once on a radio in a shop during lunch in the winter, with a love unconfined and unrestrained, and over as soon as it began. The rhythms and shape never change, and EJ's voice strains against the repetition. This is the old way.
I'll let the music fade out a little bit. That was from Lore, so not the film I was talking about, but it was the film that I was also trying to come at the idea of myth or myth making from another angle. I was really interested in this word nostalgia, or the critique nostalgia, as it's thrown against, you know, certain works as like, oh, this is like too nostalgic, or this work is as, I don't know, working too much in this realm of memory or melancholy, or just a sort of vapid relationship to the past. And I don't know, I was really into nostalgia, or just looking at what does it mean to feel nostalgic. And as I was thinking about myth making and how myths exist in our tribe, I was also thinking about the myth makers. Like, who was the first person that told the myth of I don't know, of how we were created some, I don't know, again, eons ago? and how to humanize the myth maker and how to understand the myth maker as a person that was feeling something, capable of emotions and full of the complexities of their life in the everyday practice. And so I started to think about nostalgia and Hollis Frampton's film, Nostalgia, and also this idea of lore. The title of the film is Lore, and as that relates to folklore or these stories that also exist as part of ourselves, how does one's nostalgia become lore? Or what is the function of nostalgia? Is it lore? Is it the stories that we create? And so I made this film, something as an homage to the people that I was around or in the place that I was living in at the time, as a way to memorialize this and, I don't know, be active in the process of feeling nostalgic about this piece in this film and thinking about how I will think about it later, you know? It's been 3 or 4 years since I've made that film, and still my relationship is changing and evolving. And how I remember it isn't necessarily how it was, but I still wonder about how I think about it in 4 or 5 years, or 6 or 7 years, or 10, 20 years, you know? And what will the memories be of that? And also, how do I exist in terms of my imagination of who I would have become, or who I am now, or who the future me is? It's very confusing, which is like why I make films, because like there's these swirling ideas of uncertainty that I'm really interested in moving through or exploring through this form, through these images, and through these different mediums. I think we can play the next clip. I don't know which one it's going to be. So this is from I'll Remember You As You Were, Not As What You'll Become. And it opens the film, and it's a sort of procession from an abstracted powwow scene that I took at Portland State University when I returned to film the powwow for the student group there. And it means a lot of different things to me. Like one, it's a surreal and abstracted sort of look at a procession of Native peoples in this place, dancing and performing. It can be a metaphor for the road of life and death, which is the sort of idea of reincarnation that my tribe believes in and follows. It is also a sort of surreal, dreamlike space where, I mean, does this powwow ever end? Does this procession ever end? Who are these dancers, and how do they exist, and what sort of plane? And I mean, it's that plurality of questions, that plurality of ways that that can be understood is what I'm drawn to, or even how I think about this idea of the present in relationship to the future and the past. I mean, as Grace points out in her book, indigenous futurisms is futurisms, it's plural because there isn't just one. We are, I don't know, there's over 500 federally recognized tribes in the United States alone. And the United States' relationship to indigenous peoples is different from Canada's, different from Mexico's, Central America, South America, New Zealand, Australia, all these different places. And that's something that really has to be recognized as we move through these different co-futurisms and understand not only how do we imagine ourselves in the future in this plurality, but how do we exist in the present? And what sort of ways do we understand ourselves in this presence in relationship to the past and the possibility of the future, but how are these different ideas collapsed into, I don't know, something that we're all trying to understand through these vicissitudes of life. This clock says 1 minute and 30 seconds. I don't know if that means that they're going to cut me off or it just turned yellow. So I do want to end on this one more clip. It is from a new film called Sunflower Siege Engine, where it very much is a collapsing of time and different relationships to being native in the United States. The first part is a section that I wrote about, I guess, like my body and my presence in these different spaces and what does it mean to be myself and how I look and how I exist and how I move through the world. Reflections, poetically, on that sort of space. And it ends with a clip from Richard Oakes' speech at Alcatraz in 1969, I believe, which was an indigenous-led resistance movement on the island of Alcatraz in San Francisco Bay. And it really points to that, I don't know, I'm a U.S. citizen now, but we haven't always been. Rather, our path to citizenry began as prisoners of war and through incarceration and through the reservation system. And so that's a strange history to look at or to think about how we exist in the United States. And I don't know. I think I'm still thinking through it. But we can end on that clip.
I smoke these days. I don't remember when I stopped being young, but the pain in my body and weariness in my hands make it clear. It was a long time ago last night when I was losing voice at the lamps, following me down the street, saying, "Don't look at me anymore. Don't let them see me. I'm tired of my face and my voice and my hands." There's a failure in our walk, I think to myself as I think about body and face and form and place and the way my hands look when they type these words, when they clap real loud, when they squeeze yours real tight, when they hold these books, when they clutch that beer, when they shake that at night after tossing and turning for hours on end, trying to dream those dreams I had when I was small, when you were old and when I saw them in your words and heard your voice.
The so-called...
Just a minute, channel for Mr.
Okay.
Yeah, roll, John.
We feel that the so-called Alcatraz Island is more than suitable for an Indian reservation, as determined by the white man's own standards. By this we mean that this place resembles most Indian reservations in that, 1, it is isolated from modern facilities and without adequate means of transportation. 2, it has no fresh running water. 3, it has inadequate sanitation facilities. 4, there are no oil or mineral rights. 5, there's no industry, and so unemployment is very great. 6, there are no health care facilities. 7, the soil is rocky and unproductive, and the land does not support game. 8, There are no educational facilities. 9, the population has always exceeded the land base. 10, the population has always been held as prisoners and kept dependent upon others. Further,
Got it, Norm.
that's all right, I'm just one of that.
This is where it turns into a sing-along song. So I've managed to talk for 20 minutes without talking about dreams. But for me, it's a way of collapsing these different ideas of how we relate to the past and also how we relate to the future. I mean, the present is an intersection of both. And it's a way to look at the responsibility of that. Not only to understand that I am the dream of someone, but also who will be my dream. Or, as Bob Dylan said, I'll let you be in my dream if I can be in yours. But that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sky, for this incredible journey. We have time to take really few questions before we go downstairs for a book signing where we'll be able to discuss more. But Jacopo, you wanted?
Hi, thank you very much. I just have a very precise question that I would like to explain me a little bit better because I'm not sure I understood. You said when you were talking about lore, I think you talked about going back to the first myth maker. Does that mean that the myth is not true? Or is the myth maker a witness, the first one? Because I understand that myth evolves, but I also have this vision that the first one was actually a witness that something that really happened. And from the way you were telling it, I got the impression that you think that it's never actually happened, it's just an imagination or a dream. So I would like to understand that a little bit better.
Well, I don't think that I spoke in such absolutes. It's just like, it's also points to the fluidity of like how we relate to these things. Mythmaker can mean so many different things, and like as I mentioned, there's like 500 tribes in the United States, and there's 500 stories, there's 500 myths, and I am reluctant to impose like my own beliefs in terms of my nation, my tribe, and our cosmologies on others, or look at as an evaluatory tool in understanding their myths. So, look, I mean, I was very vague in what I said, and that also allows you to impose or just like relate to it through your own lens of understanding, which I'll allow. I mean, of course I'm going to allow. Who am I to say you can't, But I'm also like not going to give any concrete answers about my own beliefs around that because, like I said, these are things that have been extracted from our communities for years, for decades, for centuries by anthropologists, by people trying to understand what it is and how we believe and how we exist in the world. So I'm not necessarily, yes, to answer your question, but no. Or maybe.
Est-ce qu'on a une autre question?
Oh yeah, sorry. Thank you so much, Sky. I have one question. I'm just curious to know how is your work talked about or discussed, or what are the conversations or feedback that you have from members of your nation or other nations, and members of the different nations, but also of different ages, possibly, how the, let's say, an older generation or a younger generation might be approaching your work and looking at it, and how they talk about it with you.
Pretty generatively. I feel like also, and generously. I feel like audiences tend to be generous, which I feel grateful for. I also view the work as propositions, as questions, not as definite assertions of how things are or how they should be. You know, like with a film like Lore or a film like I'll Remember You As You Were or Fainting Spells even, the first clip that I showed, it's not a film that is designed to say this is an official entry into the Ho-Chunk canon. And I think that that openness allows for more interpretation and ways to relate to it. I mean, I've shown my work to a lot of different people from a lot of different communities. Like I did a feature called Mothni, Towards the Ocean, Towards the Shore. And one of the first groups of people we showed it to was Ground Round Elders. And I mean, just look, my work can be a bit abstract and opaque, but that's also not a barrier to entry, you know? It's an assumption that it might be. Rather, I don't know, I feel like the elders got it, you know? Like they knew what I was trying to do. And that sort of communication and that sort of relationship is important. Like one, in terms of understanding these different relationships to the elderly and the youth, and also where I fit in as someone that isn't quite elderly yet, but also far from being youthful, you know? I'm 38. And so it's just like, you know, also the understanding like how I relate to the different sort of ways that one might, I don't know, ingest media, respond to media, and also how quickly that is changing. You know, I'm not even quite sure like how these films function anymore, you know? Like, I mean, with these different formats and the accessibility of editing tools, like TikTok is an amazing editor, it's a video editor, and it's going to teach a lot of people how to edit video in ways that we can't foresee. And even in the materials that I work through, video and 16mm film, and I guess it's just those two really, but those two, like being a complementary or conversational with my own relationship to these artifacts and to these images that I'm making. And so, I mean, I can say, yeah, people like it, but also people don't really tell you when they don't like things.
Thank you very much. I think we have to call it a day. We can speak more downstairs as well, but take the... Okay.
Yeah, no, it was a follow-up remark more than... What I thought was interesting was the question about the myth is, I don't understand the myth that is created by one person. It is something that is, and you mentioned it also, and it relates to what we had earlier with Kara Keeling. So the myth can have this prison-like imagination about the past, and this is formative for the present and maybe for the future. So I think it's more interesting for me to imagine that the myth is not the construction of one person, but it's a reflection also, like society is in fact imposing ways of thinking of ourselves. And so the dream, where you are the dreamer and part of the dream, is when you take your freedom and you are becoming the agent of what you can let go and what you can take in. So I think just to make the link with Kara and Sun Ra, I think it's very nice how your work in a totally different way is picking that up and pushing it in other directions.
No, thank you, and I really appreciate that. I mean, even just like hearing like, yeah, Kara and like Sun Ra and have these different ideas of myth, or I think it's just like, I mean, how myth is such a broad word. It's a container that can be filled in so many different ways, or it's just like part of these larger constellations, these networks, or these archipelagos of looking at ways of understanding each other through this word, or through one's relationship to this idea or this word as a container, and who fills it up with what, or how do they fill it up with, or how much do they fill it up with. And it's nothing that is set in stone, but rather it is a means to understanding or relating to an experience outside of our own. And like, I mean, there's so many different ways of understanding myth, you know, like Naomi's film from last night and her work, you know, it's just like, I think that that's what's really exciting about it, is that there is an expanse of ideas of understanding and relating to myth by peoples from many different colonized parts of the world. And it's that assertion and those questions that beget or point to an agency around these things that is really important. You know, because there is no singular idea of what a myth is or how it exists, but rather it's just like, you know, a reflection or a refraction on different ways of being and knowing.
Thank you so much, Sky. So again, thank you everyone for this day.